Well, how's everyone doing this afternoon? Too full? Well, and as always, I've heard a couple of comments about being sleepy. But you can either go to sleep and have a short nap, or you can wait just a little while and have a long nap, because I'm not going to talk very long. Well, we finished the book of 2 Corinthians, and I've decided I want to take at least some lessons out of the book of Hebrews. And I'm wondering, as we begin this thought process, anybody know anything about the book of Hebrews? As I thought back, I don't remember listening to very many people teach the book of Hebrews. And I don't ever remember anyone preaching through the book of Hebrews, at least in my circle that I've been involved in. And so I'm wondering if you kind of understand the general overriding reason the book of Hebrews is written. And by the way, we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. There are all kinds of speculations about different people. Some people lean to the point that Paul wrote it, but it's not identified. No one knows who wrote the book of Hebrews. But the reason it's written, from the first page to the last page, is that by the time the writer writes this book, there are many people who are just giving up on Christianity and walking away. It's just kind of worn out with them. They don't want to do it any longer. Now that means that's probably 50, 60, 70 years after the early church that we read about in the book of Acts. But it's interesting to me, I saw an article just yesterday that talked about the number of high-profile Christian leaders that were denouncing their faith and walking away. And some of them are Christian music artists, some of them are in other walks, but just walking away from it, saying it's not what I thought it was. It hasn't worked out like I wanted it to. Do you think that's kind of a real problem? And does it happen that even our own involvement and our own working with the local congregation or being involved in the local congregation, does it not change, at least in the way we do it or the interest level we have, as we go through life stages? Does it change? So when our children were little, we had a certain kind of involvement in the church and we were doing certain things. When our children got older, we were involved at a much deeper level. And there was a time when I would say Susan and I were still called young married when we were living at Enid, that we had a whole flock of people about our age that we were so heavily involved with. In fact, Sue showed me a picture of a couple, and it was a picture they had posted someplace. And Sue said, "Look, that's the picture they took when we had our 50s party at Enid all those years ago." You know, and don't know how many couples were there in that group. Highly involved. But now their kids are gone from the ranks of a youth group and even gone from home. Do we then go through a life stage that changes how we deal in church? And the answer is yes. And then you retire like Ronnie, and what's life look like now? Well, Ronnie just told me, he was just gone last week to Branson. He just got through telling me up here, and Greg and I were sitting up here, and he said, "Well, I'm going to be gone next week to, I've forgotten where he said, we're going to be traveling. And then the next week we're going to be at Tiffany's because she gets Monday off. But his life stage is such that he can do what? Just go. The Waldrops go all the time because it's a part of life and the way they want to live right now, so it involves where they are now. So we all understand that our life stages change how we're involved in a congregation. At the same time, while that's going on, we easily get, by the hand of Satan, disillusioned in other areas of life so that it affects our spiritual walk. You think that can happen? You have a problem, like we talked about from the book of James for so many weeks, and it keeps going, it won't go away, and maybe it's with someone in your family, a child or something, you just have this problem, and it just won't go away, and it keeps nagging at you until finally you kind of look at all of life, and certainly life as it belongs to God, and you kind of want to what? Just give up. And we have a host of young people who are giving up and walking away. And because they get so disillusioned. Sometimes they get disillusioned with us because we don't understand, or we don't try to understand, it seems, the young people. Sometimes it's our fault. Without any doubt in my mind, sometimes it's our fault. Their fault too, but sometimes we don't accommodate too well. But anyway, what I've just described is nothing new. As Solomon would say, there's nothing new under the sun. It was happening in the earliest days of the church, the earliest days. So the writer of the book of Hebrews is going to write this material to try to show us you're giving up on the very best that there is. In fact, that's why in Hebrews chapter 10, he'll end up saying, for those of you who have known the truth and you turn your back on it or you walk away from it, it's really a giant mistake. He said you're doing despite to the Spirit of grace by which you were saved. You're trotting underfoot when you walk away and go back to the other world. You see how he talks like this? The whole book is about that. Now, as he's writing about that, his intent is to say one primary thing, that you should never walk away from Jesus. His subject is going to be Jesus all the way through. He's going to talk about how Jesus was above all else. Whether it's Moses, whether it's Abraham, whether it's Melchizedek, whether it's whatever. Jesus is above all else. Do you understand what you've been given? Is what he's going to try to argue all the way through this book. So I just want to read the first few verses and show you how he starts that. It's all about Jesus. He says, in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Now, obviously, this writer is going to have a slant toward what kind of ethnic group? The Jews, the Christian Jews. And in the times that have gone before us, in ancient times, a Jew would look back and say, God spoke to our forefathers how? Well, through prophets, he says. Through prophets. And he spoke to those prophets many different times and in many different ways. That's how God got his word across. It might come through Isaiah, it might come through Jeremiah, it might even come through Moses, who in a sense was considered a prophet. He's not the ones we list, but he was that kind of figure. So all these people were used by God to deliver his message. But in these last days, God has spoken to us differently. How has he spoken to us? Verse 2. In his last days, he has spoken to us by his whom? By his Son. These last days, we're the last days. In these days, God has spoken to us by his Son. So already at the beginning, without going any further, he's going to tell us that God didn't use some prophet. God used his own what? His messenger was his Son. And that should be able to be kind of piquing our interest already. And he's hoping that the readers of this book he's written, it will capture their attention. His Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through him he made the universe. So it's not just John. It's not just the Gospel of John that says that he was there with God in the beginning and he was God and all things were made by him. Now comes the writer of the book of Hebrews. Says almost the identical thing, only in other words. Not only has he spoken through his Son, but he has made him heir of all things, and through him he made the what? Universe. He made everything. Jesus was there. What I said this morning about when he created that first living man, breathed into that man the breath of life, Jesus was right there involved in that. Jesus was doing that. And now he speaks to you and to me by this Jesus who is heir of all things and who he has made the universe. Now, you just got to stop and realize what he's just said. He sent us his Son, but his Son not only has heir of all things, he made the universe. Now, in our ability to think, reason, see, how does anything get more sophisticated or larger or than the universe? I mean, we've alluded several times, though I can't speak to it very well because I don't know enough about it, but we've alluded several times to the size of the Milky Way in which we live as a little tiny dot. And the billions of stars that scientists say are there. But how many more galaxies are there beyond the Milky Way? And we don't even know the answer. We just find more all the time. The universe is like something our minds can't comprehend. But the one God chose to speak through to us, he made that deal. Now, are you going to decide in this world? Here's the question. Are you going to decide in this world to go off and listen to someone like Bill Jones over here? Or are you going to listen to the one who made the universe? Which one makes more sense? That's how he begins this book. And that's how he's going to continue to go through this book, because he's going to try to show whatever you folks are doing, wherever you're turning, you've got to get back to what's real here. And he's talking about the basics of the basics right here. So he's spoken to us through his Son. His Son made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. We're never going to get through it if I go at this pace, but just, did you hear what that said? The Son is the radiance of his glory. He's the best picture we have of God. And it's a radiant picture. And he's the exact representation of his being. He's the exact representation of God's being because he is whom? He is God. It's almost to the point, it used to be, I used to like it. Now I don't like it so well, but I can't tell you the number of times I go someplace with my dad right now and they say, the two of you look alike at the nursing home. I think they're wanting to move me in. I mean, you look like your dad. And now I'm looking at my dad saying, he's looking a little old, you know. Well, Jesus is the exact representation of God. You can't tell them apart. So when you read all these stories, like we quickly referred to this morning, you're seeing the heart of God. You're seeing the image of God. You're seeing the exact representation of God. God is no mystery if you study the life of Jesus. Because that's where you're going to find who God is. That's why studying the Gospels is so very important. And do you realize on all the Sunday morning preaching I've done here over these 3 years that 90% of it has been out of 2 books? How long did it take us to go through Mark's gospel, which is my favorite? And then in Luke, we never thought we were going to get through it. I mean, it took us 18 months or so. And it could have taken longer. And I can't wait at some point to jump into the Gospel of John because it's different than all of them. But as we look at those kind of books, who are we learning about? Jesus. And if we're learning about Jesus, we're learning about whom? We're learning about God. He's the exact representation of God. He's the radiance of God's glory. And then it says this. It's Jesus who sustains all things by His powerful word. He sustains all things. I don't know exactly what that means, but I can tell you that at His word, at the word of God, this world will one day be what? Burned up. It'll disappear in us, just like that. But it's by His word right now that everything stays in orbit just like it ought to, and everything is tilted just like it's supposed to be, and everything is laid in perfection because He sustains everything by His powerful word. And if He doesn't sustain it, it becomes unsustainable. And every time that something becomes unsustainable, I teach this everywhere, the byproduct is chaos. It's always. So in your family budget, if you're spending a lot more than you're taking in and you see it's unsustainable, the byproduct is going to be what? Chaos. It's going to show up somewhere, in your marriage or somewhere. If your workload, your work existence is unsustainable, you can't keep it going like this, the byproduct will be chaos. Now, here's another interesting point. In a congregation, if it becomes unsustainable, the byproduct will be what? Chaos. It'll show up in all of our lives, this chaos. And nobody likes chaos. But Jesus keeps things sustained if we work with Him. I don't know. I'm taking too much time. I got to quit here. But let's read the rest of it. Sustaining us by His powerful word, after He had provided purification for sins. How long could we spend on that? After He had provided purification for sins. How did He do that? How did Jesus provide purification for sin? Yeah, He died. They spilled His blood out on the ground. He provided that purification of sins. After He did that, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. I mean, we're talking about 3 verses, and we see the whole show. You know, all you had to do is watch the introduction. You got the whole thing. After He provided purification for sin, another mouthful sentence. He sat down at the right hand of the Father, of the Majesty in heaven. And so He became as much superior. He came as much superior to the angels as the name He has inherited is superior to theirs. So if you're sitting out here and you've got a big appreciation for angels, like some apparently did back then, He has this piece of advice for you. Jesus, the exact representation of God, the one who sustains all things by His powerful word, the one who provided the purification for sins, this Jesus is greater than whom? The angels. His name is superior to the angels. Doesn't it excite you to see how He's writing about, in 4 verses, He talks to us about the whole picture so we can understand it? So the argument's going to be all the way through, and I'll quit with this. Why would you ever give up on Jesus? Why would you ever give up on Jesus? But Satan is powerful. He can tear congregations up. He can tear families up. He can cause problems that won't go away. He's powerful. It makes me want to throw up my hands and say, I can't do this anymore. Don't want to do it anymore. But he's going to write to say, let me tell you why you ought to stay with it. So, stop there. Pick up with something like that next week.